In the vast expanse of the Galactic Defense Academy, where the brightest minds from across 17 different species gathered to forge the future's greatest warriors, there existed a peculiar human cadet who never spoke a single word during her entire 4-year tenure. While her alien classmates debated military strategy in their melodious clicks, growls, and harmonic frequencies, she sat in absolute silence, absorbing every lesson, every tactical formation, every whispered secret of interstellar warfare. Her instructors assumed she was mute. Her fellow cadets believed she was either incredibly stupid or harboring some deep psychological trauma. The Academy's medical staff ran countless tests, finding her vocal cords perfectly functional, her neural pathways completely normal. Yet Cadet Elena Vasquez remained as silent as the vacuum of space itself. What none of them knew was that Elena carried within her a legacy that would reshape the very foundations of galactic warfare. A battle name whispered in the darkest corners of human space. A legend that older species had hoped was merely myth. A power that had been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to awaken and remind the galaxy why humans had earned their place among the stars not through diplomacy or trade, but through something far more primal and terrifying. The Academy was about to discover that sometimes the quietest students carry the loudest thunder. The morning alarm echoed through the crystalline corridors of the Galactic Defense Academy like a symphony of dying stars. Elena Vasquez opened her eyes in her cramped dormitory pod, watching the artificial sunrise paint the walls in shades of amber and gold. Around her, the sounds of awakening cadets filled the air. The chittering songs of the Zephyrian insectoids, the deep harmonic hums of the Cronin stone singers, and the rapid-fire clicking conversations of the Veltar telepaths. Elena said nothing. She had never said anything. Rolling from her narrow bunk, she moved with the fluid precision that had become her trademark over the past 3 years and 11 months at the Academy. Her movements were economical, purposeful, like a predator conserving energy before strike. The other cadets in her dormitory section barely acknowledged her presence anymore. To them, she had become part of the background, another piece of Academy furniture that occasionally shifted position, still giving everyone the silent treatment, human. The voice belonged to Thrixtar, a Veltar whose purple carapace gleamed with morning moisture. His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Final examinations begin today. Last chance to prove you're not completely brain-dead. Elena gathered her regulation gear with methodical calm. Her academy uniform, pristine and perfectly maintained. Her tactical datapad, containing 4 years' worth of flawlessly completed assignments submitted without a single spoken explanation. Her ceremonial blade, standard issue for all humanoid species, though hers showed signs of extensive private practice that puzzled her instructors. The walk to the central examination complex took her through the Academy's pride and joy, the Memorial Hall of Heroes. Holographic displays showcased the greatest military minds in galactic history. Admiral Cathis of Andromeda, whose tactical brilliance had saved 3 star systems from the Void Swarm. General Mortex, the Unbreakable, whose Cronin heavy infantry had held the line at the siege of Titan's Gate. Commander Silkwing Zara, whose aerial assault doctrine had revolutionized space combat. And there, in a small corner display that most cadets overlooked, stood a simple memorial to the human companies of the Outer Rim Wars. No names, no faces, just a single line of text. They came from Earth's darkness and reminded us why some victories require monsters. Elena paused before this display, as she had every day for 4 years. Her reflection wavered in the holographic light, and, for just a moment, her perfectly controlled expression cracked. Something ancient and terrible flickered behind her dark eyes before disappearing behind her mask of silence. The examination hall buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 17 different species filled the massive auditorium, their varied forms creating a rainbow of evolutionary diversity. The Galactic Defense Academy's final examinations were legendary throughout known space. A grueling 3-day test that would determine not just graduation, but assignment to the elite units that protected galactic civilization. Elena took her assigned seat in Section 7, surrounded by the Academy's most promising tacticians. To her left sat Velnara, a Zephyrian whose compound eyes could process tactical data at superhuman speeds. To her right, the hulking form of Stone Brother Grax dominated 2 seats, his Cronin physiology requiring reinforced furniture. These were the Academy's golden children, the cadets whose brilliant contributions to classroom discussions had marked them as future leaders. And there was Elena, who had never spoken a word in class, yet somehow maintained perfect academic scores through written work alone. Instructor Prime Veloth, an ancient Veltar whose purple carapace bore the scars of a dozen campaigns, raised his primary limbs for silence. Cadets, today you begin your final trial. 3 days of intensive examination covering tactical theory, strategic implementation, combat psychology, and practical leadership. Those who excel will be assigned to frontline positions in the Galactic Defense Fleet. Those who fail, his mandibles clicked ominously, will find civilian careers more suitable to their limitations. The first examination phase began immediately. Holographic battle scenarios materialized above each cadet's workstation, displaying complex tactical situations that required immediate analysis and response. Elena's scenario showed a typical border skirmish, pirates raiding a mining colony, outnumbering the defenders 3-1, using superior mobility to avoid direct confrontation. Around her, cadets began furiously calculating response vectors, supply line vulnerabilities, and tactical formations. Their various forms of communication filled the air: Zephyrian song calculations, Cronin stone speech, Veltar mind touches. Elena simply stared at her display, her dark eyes tracking the pirate formations with predatory focus. Her hands moved across the tactical interface with surgical precision. No hesitation, no second-guessing. Her solution emerged like a work of art, elegant, brutal, and absolutely decisive. She identified the pirate's command vessel through movement pattern analysis, plotted an infiltration route that exploited their overconfidence, and designed a decapitation strike that would eliminate their leadership while minimizing civilian casualties. But what made her instructors lean forward in their observation booth was the cold mathematics of her approach. Where other cadets sought to minimize losses and achieve objectives through superior strategy, Elena's solution carried an undertone of something darker. Her infiltration routes suggested knowledge of techniques not taught at the academy. Her targeting priorities indicated a willingness to accept terrible risks for decisive results. Fascinating, murmured Instructor Prime Veloth, his compound eyes analyzing Elena's submission. Her tactical framework suggests training beyond academy curriculum. Where would a human cadet acquire such specialized knowledge? His assistant, a young Zephyrian named Kliktar, harmonized nervous confusion. Her academic records show standard human background, colony world upbringing, no military family connections, no previous combat experience listed. Velotha's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. Perhaps we should examine her psychological profile more carefully. The first day concluded with theoretical examinations covering military history, xenobiology, and strategic resource management. Elena completed each section with mechanical efficiency, her answers demonstrating not just academic knowledge, but intuitive understanding of concepts that typically required years of practical experience to master. As cadets filed out of the examination hall, conversations buzzed with excitement and anxiety. Study groups formed spontaneously, with students sharing notes and discussing complex theoretical problems. Elena walked alone, as always, her presence creating a small bubble of silence in the chattering crowd. "Hey, silence, sister." The voice belonged to Cadet Marcus Chun, one of the few other humans at the academy. His Earth accent carried the refined tones of the inner colonies, marking him as products of humanity's more civilized worlds. Feeling confident about tomorrow's practical examinations, Elena turned to regard him with those dark, unreadable eyes. For a moment, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her gaze that reminded him of deep space, vast, cold, and hiding things better left undiscovered. She nodded once, politely, and continued walking. Marcus watched her go, feeling oddly unsettled. He had tried for 4 years to break through Elena's wall of silence, driven partly by curiosity and partly by the loneliness that came with being one of only 6 humans among thousands of alien cadets. But Elena remained a mystery wrapped in an enigma, her perfect academic performance shadowed by her absolute refusal to engage socially with anyone. That night, Elena sat alone in her dormitory pod, cleaning and maintaining her ceremonial blade with ritualistic precision. The weapon gleamed under the soft lighting, its edge honed to molecular sharpness through techniques she had learned long before arriving at the academy. As she worked, her lips moved silently, forming words in a language that existed only in humanity's darkest corners. Outside her window, the academy's 3 moons cast silver light across the training grounds where tomorrow's practical examinations would unfold. Elena knew these tests would be different. Theory was safe, contained within the boundaries of academic discussion. But practical examinations required action, decision-making under pressure, leadership of actual military units. For 4 years, she had hidden behind silence and written submissions. Tomorrow, that protection would be stripped away. The academy would see what she really was, and Elena wasn't entirely certain she could control what emerged. Her hands stilled on the blade as a memory surfaced unbidden. A burning colony ship. Screams in the darkness. The taste of recycled air thick with smoke and terror. A 12-year-old girl crawling through ventilation shafts while things with too many teeth hunted her family through darkened corridors. The moment when silence stopped being a choice and became survival itself. Elena sheathed her blade and lay back on her narrow bunk. Around her, the academy slept, filled with dreams of glorious military careers and noble service to galactic civilization. But Elena's dreams were different. In her dreams, the silence broke, and the galaxy remembered why humans had earned their place among the stars not through diplomacy or wisdom, but through their unique talent for becoming the monsters other species needed them to be. The final examinations would begin in 6 hours. After 4 years of perfect silence, Elena Vasquez was about to discover whether she could keep her secrets buried, or whether the Academy would finally learn the truth about the quiet human cadet who had never spoken a word. Outside, the 3 moons continued their eternal dance, and something in the darkness between the stars whispered her true name, the name she had buried beneath years of silence, the name that would make grown warriors weep and empires tremble. But tomorrow was still 6 hours away, and Elena closed her eyes, gathering strength for the storm that was coming. The Academy thought they knew her. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Dawn broke across the Academy's training grounds like spilled blood across polished steel. Elena stood in formation with 36 other cadets, the Academy's top performers selected for the advanced practical examinations. These tests would simulate real combat scenarios using live ammunition, actual military hardware, and situations designed to push cadets beyond their theoretical limits. Instructor Prime Veloth addressed the assembled group, his scarred carapace gleaming in the morning light. Today, you will command actual military units in live-fire exercises. Your decisions will affect real soldiers, real equipment, and real outcomes. Failure here does not mean poor grades. It means people die. Elena felt something stir in the depths of her chest, like a predator awakening after a long hibernation. For 4 years, she had suppressed this feeling, buried it beneath layers of silence and academic compliance. But, standing here, surrounded by the tools of war, she could feel her carefully constructed mask beginning to crack. The first practical examination involved leading a mixed-species squad through an urban warfare scenario. The Academy had constructed a full-scale city replica, complete with civilian population simulators, hostile forces using live ammunition with training modifications, and all the chaos and confusion of real combat. Elena's assigned squad consisted of 5 soldiers from different species. A Cronin heavy weapons specialist whose stone-like hide could absorb tremendous punishment, 2 Zephyrian scouts whose aerial capabilities provided unmatched reconnaissance, a Veltar communications expert whose telepathic abilities could coordinate complex operations, and a human demolitions specialist from the Outer Rim territories. "So," said Private Marcus Steele, the human explosives expert, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who had seen real combat before joining the Academy. "I guess you're our fearless leader. Hope you're more talkative in the field than you are in class." Elena looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. For a moment, the squad felt a strange chill, as if the temperature had dropped several degrees. Then, she moved to the tactical planning table, her movements suddenly different, more fluid, more purposeful, carrying an authority that seemed to emerge from nowhere. She began sketching tactical positions on the planning display, her hands moving with surgical precision. The deployment pattern she created was unlike anything taught in Academy doctrine, aggressive, unconventional, and carrying undertones of something darker than standard military strategy. Private First Class Thrixkar, the Veltar communications specialist, attempted to establish telepathic contact. His mind touched the edges of Elena's consciousness and immediately recoiled as if burned. "What in the 17 hells?" he muttered, his mandibles clicking in distress. "I can't read her at all. It's like trying to touch empty space." Elena finished her tactical planning and looked up at her squad. For the first time in 4 years at the Academy, she opened her mouth to speak. The words emerged in a voice none of them expected. Low, precise, and carrying an authority that made hardened soldiers straighten to attention. "Listen carefully. I will say this only once." The squad froze. Even the instructors monitoring from their observation posts leaned forward, finally hearing the voice of their most enigmatic cadet. The scenario involves hostiles holding civilian hostages in a 3-story urban structure. Standard doctrine would call for methodical clearing, room by room, minimizing civilian casualties through careful advancement. "We will not be following standard doctrine." Private Steele raised an eyebrow. "Care to elaborate, Silent Sister?" Elena's gaze fixed on him with laser intensity. "My name is not Silent Sister. When we enter that building, you will follow my orders without question, without hesitation, and without moral reservations. Is that understood?" Something in her tone made the veteran explosives expert nod automatically. Around the planning table, 5 experienced soldiers found themselves responding to Elena's presence like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Her quiet authority was absolute, undeniable, and slightly terrifying. "Cronin Heavy, you will breach the eastern wall at precisely 0700 hours. Your stone hide will absorb their initial response fire and draw their attention. Zephyrian scouts, you will approach from above through the skylight access points. Do not engage, observe, and report positions. Veltar communications, you will maintain tactical coordination, but do not attempt to read my mind again. Trust me, you do not want to see what lives there." Human demolitions, Elena continued, her voice carrying new layers of command presence. "You will prepare shaped charges for strategic structural points. While I give the signal, you will bring down specific sections of the building to funnel hostiles into predetermined kill zones." Private Steele whistled low. "That's some hardcore tactical thinking, Silent. I mean, what should we call you?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, as if wrestling with something deep inside herself. When she spoke again, her voice carried echoes of things that existed in humanity's darker corners. "During the operation, you'll call me Ghost." The urban warfare scenario began with brutal efficiency. Elena's squad moved through the simulated city like a precision instrument, each member executing their assigned role with mechanical perfection. But it was Elena herself who commanded attention from the observation posts. Her transformation from silent cadet to tactical commander, leaving instructors scrambling to understand what they were witnessing. She moved through the urban environment like liquid shadow, her awareness extending beyond normal human limitations. Every sound, every movement, every tactical possibility seemed to register in her consciousness simultaneously. Her commands came in whispered fragments that somehow reached each squad member at precisely the right moment. Cronin heavy, breach in 3-2 mark. The eastern wall exploded inward in a shower of concrete and synthetic building materials. Hostile forces immediately concentrated their fire on the breach point, their training rounds sparking harmlessly off the Cronin's stone-hide armor. Zephyrian scouts, skylights are clear. Descend to positions Alpha and Beta. Two insectoid figures dropped through ceiling access points with perfect precision, their compound eyes immediately cataloging hostile positions and civilian locations. In the observation booth, Instructor Prime Veloth watched Elena's tactical display with growing amazement. Her approach defied conventional doctrine, but the mathematical precision of her planning was undeniable. She was orchestrating the engagement like a conductor directing a symphony of destruction. Veltar Communications relay the following. Hostile command element is located in Room 7, second floor, Eastern Corridor. 3 combatants, 2 civilian shields. How could she possibly know that? Muttered Sub-Instructor Kliktar, his harmonic frequencies carrying confusion and concern. Elena's voice continued through the communication network, reaching all squad members simultaneously. Human demolitions, shaped charges on structural supports 7, 12, and 19. Time detonation in 45 seconds. All units, prepare for dynamic repositioning. Private Steele placed his explosives with the expertise of someone who had turned buildings into rubble during real combat. Ghost, this is some serious professional-grade tactical thinking. Where'd you learn to operate like this? Elena's response came through private communication, her voice carrying undertones that made the hardened veteran's blood run cold. Some lessons are learned in classrooms. Others are carved into bone and memory with burning ships and dead families. The shaped charges detonated with surgical precision, bringing down specific sections of the building while leaving escape routes for civilians and creating perfect kill zones for hostile forces. Elena's tactical prediction proved flawless. Enemy combatants funneled exactly where her planning indicated, and her squad eliminated them with minimal risk to hostages. But it was Elena's personal performance that left observers speechless. She moved through the building like a ghost made flesh, appearing behind enemy positions with impossible stealth, her ceremonial blade moving in patterns that suggested training far beyond academy curriculum. When hostile forces attempted to use civilian shields, she found angles of attack that seemed mathematically impossible, eliminating threats while leaving innocents completely unharmed. The scenario concluded in 18 minutes, a new academy record. Elena's squad had achieved total tactical success with 0 casualties, minimal ammunition expenditure, and surgical precision that exceeded even veteran unit performance standards. As the simulation ended and safety protocols engaged, Elena's transformation reversed as quickly as it had begun. The commanding presence, the tactical authority, the cold precision, all of it seemed to drain away, leaving behind the quiet, enigmatic cadet her classmates knew. She holstered her blade and stood silently, as if waiting for dismissal. Her squad members stared at her with expressions ranging from amazement to concern. Private Steele approached carefully, his voice carrying new respect. Silent. I mean, Elena. That was something else entirely. I've served with special operations units that couldn't coordinate like that. Elena met his gaze with those dark, unreadable eyes. For a moment, he glimpsed something in their depths that made him step back involuntarily, something ancient and terrible and barely contained. "Thank you for your service," she said quietly. Her voice returned to its normal, almost whisper-soft tone. "I hope you never have to see that again." In the observation booth, Instructor Prime Veloth was reviewing tactical recordings with growing amazement and concern. Elena's performance had been flawless, but the method she employed, the tactical knowledge she demonstrated, the sheer level of combat expertise she displayed, none of it existed in any academy curriculum. "Run a deep background check," he ordered his assistant. "Full genetic scan, colony records, family history. I want to know everything about Cadet Elena Vasquez." "Sir," Sub-Instructor Klicktar harmonized nervously. Her psychological evaluation shows standard human parameters. No combat trauma indicators, no special forces background, no military family connections. Then, how does she fight like someone who learned warfare in the deepest hells of human space? Veloth's mandibles clicked with frustration. Her tactical approach suggests knowledge of techniques that officially don't exist, combat styles that are classified beyond our clearance levels. As Elena walked away from the training ground, her squad members watched her go with a mixture of respect and unease. They had witnessed something extraordinary, but they couldn't shake the feeling that they had also seen something dangerous, a glimpse behind a mask that was never meant to be removed. Elena felt their stares, but ignored them, focusing instead on the growing pressure in her chest. The practical examination had forced her to access abilities she had spent 4 years suppressing, and now those abilities were pushing against her carefully constructed barriers like water against a weakening dam. That night, she sat alone in her dormitory pod, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Tomorrow would bring more practical examinations, each one more demanding than the last, each one requiring her to dig deeper into the reservoir of skills she had hoped never to use again. Her lips moved silently, forming words in that ancient, terrible language that existed only in humanity's darkest corners. A prayer, perhaps, or a warning. A promise that some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. The Academy thought they had seen Elena Vasquez revealed. They had no idea that what they witnessed was merely the faintest shadow of what she truly was. Tomorrow would demand more, and Elena wasn't certain she could keep the monster caged much longer. Outside, the 3 moons continued their eternal dance, and something in the darkness between the stars whispered approval. The silent cadet was finally awakening, and the galaxy was about to remember why humans carried darkness in their souls. Not as a flaw, but as a necessary tool for survival in a universe that sometimes required monsters to fight monsters. The second day of practical examinations dawned gray and ominous, as if the Academy's weather control systems had decided to match the growing tension in the air. Elena stood with the remaining 28 cadets who had passed the initial tactical assessment, but she could feel the weight of suspicious stares from instructors and fellow students alike. Word of her extraordinary performance had spread through the Academy like wildfire, and now everyone wanted to know who Elena Vasquez really was. Instructor Prime Veloth approached the assembled group with an expression that mixed professional interest with barely concealed concern. His overnight investigation into Elena's background had yielded troubling results, or rather, the complete absence of results was troubling in itself. Her records were perfect, too perfect, as if someone had carefully constructed a false identity with flawless attention to detail. Today's examination will test your ability to command under extreme stress, Veloth announced, his mandibles clicking with authority. You will be placed in command of a full company, 200 soldiers from mixed species units. Your mission parameters will change dynamically based on developing situations. You will face multiple simultaneous crises requiring immediate decision-making with incomplete information. Elena felt that familiar stirring in her chest, stronger now than yesterday. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her true self were beginning to crack under the pressure of these examinations. Each time she accessed her buried skills, it became harder to suppress them again. Her assigned company consisted of veteran soldiers drawn from actual galactic defense fleet units, Cronin heavy infantry, Zephyrian air assault specialists, Veltar intelligence operatives, human special forces, and support units from a dozen other species. These weren't academy training simulations. These were real military professionals who would be evaluating her fitness for command. Company Sergeant Major Dextar, a grizzled Veltar whose purple carapace bore the scars of 3 separate campaigns, approached Elena's command post with obvious skepticism. "So you're the Academy cadet who's got everyone talking. Hope you're ready for the real thing, silent sister." Elena looked up from her tactical displays, and Dextar felt his confidence waver. There was something different about her today, an intensity that hadn't been there during the previous examination. Her dark eyes seemed to hold depths that no Academy cadet should possess. "Sergeant Major," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying a thread of authority that made the veteran straighten involuntarily. "Brief me on unit capabilities and current readiness status." For the next 30 minutes, Elena absorbed tactical data with machine-like efficiency. Unit strengths, equipment specifications, individual soldier capabilities, supply chain logistics. She processed it all with the cold precision of a military computer. But it was her questions that caught Dextar's attention. They weren't the theoretical inquiries of an academy student. They were the hardened, practical concerns of someone who had commanded troops in real combat. How many of your Cronin infantry have actual combat experience versus training scenarios? Which Zephyrian pilots have flown missions in contested airspace? Are your human special forces units rated for deep reconnaissance or direct action? Dextar found himself answering each question with growing respect. This wasn't a cadet playing at being an officer. This was someone who understood the brutal mathematics of warfare at a fundamental level. The first crisis scenario began without warning. Alarms blared throughout the command center as holographic displays revealed a complex tactical situation. A galactic defense fleet observation post under attack by unknown hostiles, with civilian evacuation ships trapped in the combat zone and communication networks compromised by enemy jamming. "Cadet Commander," announced the examination supervisor, "you have 200 soldiers, limited intelligence, and civilian lives at stake. How do you proceed?" Elena stared at the tactical display for exactly 15 seconds, long enough to process the available data and identify 17 different possible approaches. When she began issuing orders, her transformation was immediate and absolute. The quiet academy cadet disappeared, replaced by something that made hardened veterans snap to attention. Signal intercept teams begin frequency analysis of enemy jamming patterns. I want communication windows identified within 6 minutes. Zephyrian reconnaissance, high-altitude approach to the combat zone. Maintain radio silence until you reach predetermined coordinates. Cronin heavy infantry, begin immediate deployment to defensive positions around the evacuation ships. Her voice carried through the command center with crystalline clarity, each order delivered with the precision of someone who had orchestrated real battles with real consequences. Human special forces, prepare for insertion behind enemy lines. Your mission is to locate and eliminate the jamming source. Veltar intelligence operatives, I need threat assessment and enemy force projection based on attack patterns. Sergeant Major Dextar watched Elena work with growing amazement. She was coordinating multiple unit movements across a complex battlefield, adapting to changing conditions in real time, and displaying tactical intuition that exceeded anything in his 30 years of military service. But it was Elena's personal intervention that left everyone speechless. When the simulated enemy forces began targeting civilian evacuation ships directly, she made a decision that defied all Academy doctrine. She led a personal assault team directly into the heart of the enemy formation. "All units, this is command. I'm taking direct action against enemy command elements. Maintain your assigned positions and prepare for dynamic tactical adjustment." Dextar's mandibles clicked in alarm. "Cadet Commander," Academy regulations strictly forbid command personnel from engaging in direct combat during examinations. Elena turned to look at him, and the veteran felt his blood run cold. Her eyes had changed, becoming something dark and ancient and absolutely terrifying. When she spoke, her voice carried echoes of battles fought in the deepest darkness of space. Sergeant Major, sometimes command personnel don't have the luxury of following regulations. Sometimes they have to do what's necessary to bring their people home. She moved toward the tactical insertion point with fluid grace, her ceremonial blade appearing in her hand as if by magic. The examination supervisors found themselves frozen, uncertain whether to stop the scenario or document what was becoming the most extraordinary display of military leadership in Academy history. Elena's assault team consisted of 12 elite soldiers from mixed species units. As they approached the enemy positions, she began issuing orders in a voice that seemed to reach each soldier personally, regardless of their species or communication methods. Cronin Point breached their defensive perimeter at coordinates 77 Alpha. Zephyrian Overwatch, I need continuous reconnaissance on enemy movement patterns. Human demolitions, prepare for structural elimination of enemy command post. Veltar Support, maintain tactical coordination, but stay out of my head. The assault unfolded like a perfectly choreographed dance of destruction. Elena moved through the enemy positions like a force of nature, her blade work displaying techniques that belonged in classified military archives, not academy curricula. She identified enemy command personnel through methods that seemed impossible, eliminated threats with surgical precision, and coordinated her team's movements with mathematical perfection. In the observation booth, Instructor Prime Veloth was frantically reviewing Elena's performance data. "This is impossible," he muttered, his compound eyes analyzing tactical recordings that defied explanation. "She's displaying combat techniques that are classified at levels beyond our clearance. Movement patterns that suggest training in environments that officially don't exist. Subinstructor klickar harmonizet nervös confusion." "Sir," her genetic scans came back with some unusual markers. Human genome, but with modifications that suggest exposure to extreme environmental conditions during development. The pattern is consistent with. He paused, his melodic voice dropping to worried tones. "With children raised in the deep void colonies during the Rim Wars." Velotha's mandibles clicked in sudden understanding. "The ghost ships," he whispered. "She's one of the survivors from the ghost ships." The examination scenario concluded with Elena's complete tactical victory, but the cost of her performance was becoming apparent. As the combat simulation ended and her assault team regrouped, Elena stood in the center of the simulated battlefield, her blade still in her hand, her breathing controlled, but her eyes carrying depths that seemed to reflect entire galaxies of pain. Sergeant Major Dextar approached her carefully, his veteran instincts warning him that he was in the presence of something dangerous. "Cadet Commander, that was extraordinary. But I have to ask, where did you learn to fight like that?" Elena looked at him with those dark, haunted eyes. For a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped entirely, and Dextar glimpsed the truth that lay beneath 4 years of silence. He saw a 12-year-old girl crawling through burning corridors while monsters hunted her family. He saw a teenager learning to kill with her bare hands, because civilization had abandoned her to the darkness. He saw someone who had survived things that would break most minds, and had emerged from that darkness carrying skills that civilized species prefer to pretend didn't exist. "Some lessons aren't taught in classrooms, Sergeant Major," Elena said quietly, her voice carrying echoes of screaming metal and dying stars. "Some lessons are written in blood and burned into memory with the fires of dead worlds." She sheathed her blade with mechanical precision and walked toward the command post, leaving behind a group of veteran soldiers who were no longer certain what they had witnessed. Had they seen an Academy cadet's extraordinary examination performance? Or had they glimpsed something darker, a reminder of what humans became when civilization failed them? That evening, Elena sat alone in her dormitory pod, staring at her hands. They were steady, competent, and stained with too many memories. Tomorrow would bring the final examination, 3 days of testing that would determine not just her graduation, but her placement in the Galactic Defense Fleet hierarchy. But Elena was beginning to realize that she might not be able to control what emerged during that final test. Each examination had forced her to access deeper levels of her buried training, and now those abilities were pushing against her mental barriers like pressure against a weakening containment field. Her lips moved silently, forming words in that ancient, terrible language that existed only in humanity's darkest corners. A prayer for strength, perhaps, or a warning that some doors, once opened, revealed things that could never be hidden again. Outside her window, the Academy's 3 moons cast silver light across training grounds where tomorrow's final examination would unfold. Elena closed her eyes and tried to summon the strength to keep her secrets buried for one more day. But somewhere in the darkness between the stars, something whispered her true name. The name she had earned in fire and blood and silence. The name that would make empires tremble. Tomorrow, the Academy would learn why humans were feared throughout the galaxy, not for their wisdom or their technology, but for their unique ability to become the monsters that other species needed them to be. Tomorrow, Elena Vasquez would finally discover whether 4 years of silence had been enough to bury the ghost that lived in her soul, or whether that ghost was about to remind the galaxy why some victories required darkness to achieve. The final examination was less than 12 hours away, and Elena could feel the monster stirring, preparing to break free from its cage of silence, and show the Academy what humanity really was when civilization failed, and only survival remained. The third morning arrived with the weight of finality. Elena stood before the Academy's primary war room, a vast chamber designed to simulate the command centers of actual galactic fleet operations. Only 12 cadets remained from the original examination group, the Academy's absolute elite, and each of them would face the ultimate test of military leadership, commanding an entire battle group in a scenario designed to push them beyond all theoretical limits. Instructor Prime Veloth had spent the night reviewing classified files that required authorization from the highest levels of Galactic Defense Command. What he had discovered about Elena Vasquez, or rather, what he had failed to discover, painted a picture that chilled him to his core. Her background was a masterwork of fabricated normalcy, but beneath the surface lay hints of something far darker. The ghost ships, refugee vessels that had launched from humanity's outer rim colonies during the darkest days of the Void War, carrying survivors into deep space where official records ceased to exist. Children raised in the spaces between stars, learning skills that civilized species preferred to forget existed. The Academy's most promising cadet was apparently one of those lost children, and Veloth was beginning to understand that they had been nurturing something far more dangerous than a gifted student. Elena entered the war room with her characteristic silence, but those who had witnessed her previous performances could see the change in her bearing. The careful mask of Academy compliance was cracking, revealing glimpses of something that belonged in classified military archives rather than educational institutions. Cadet Elena Vasquez, Veloth announced, his mandibles clicking with ceremonial formality that barely concealed his deep concern. Your final examination will test your ability to command a full battle group consisting of 17 ships and over 5,000 military personnel. You will face a strategic scenario based on actual historical events with full tactical autonomy and consequences that will determine your final Academy ranking. Elena nodded silently, but those who knew what to look for could see the predator stirring behind her dark eyes. Each examination had forced her to access deeper levels of her buried training, and now she was approaching the point where her carefully constructed identity might not be able to contain what emerged. The scenario materialized in the war room's massive holographic displays, a perfect recreation of the Battle of Kepler's Gate, one of the most complex military engagements in galactic history. A critical supply convoy under attack by superior enemy forces, with civilian populations trapped in the combat zone, and political considerations that made simple tactical solutions impossible. Admiral Cathis, the actual hero of the historical battle, had taken 4 days to develop his legendary solution. Elena would have 6 hours. Cadet Commander, announced the examination supervisor, you have tactical command of the 17th Battle Group. Enemy forces outnumber your combat vessels 3-1. Civilian evacuation is incomplete, and political restrictions limit your tactical options. How do you proceed? Elena stared at the tactical display for exactly 30 seconds, her mind processing variables that existed beyond normal human comprehension. When she began issuing orders, her voice carried an authority that made veteran officers straighten to attention despite themselves. Fleet communications, establish priority channels to all civilian evacuation vessels. I need exact passenger manifests and evacuation status reports within 3 minutes. Battle Group Alpha, begin defensive formation around the primary evacuation zone. Battle Group Beta, prepare for deep strike operations against enemy supply lines. Her transformation was immediate and absolute, but this time something was different. The cold precision was still there, the tactical brilliance that had marked her previous performances, but now it was accompanied by something darker, an edge of ruthless calculation that belonged in the deepest shadows of military doctrine. Commander Thexroll, the Cronin officer assigned as Elena's second-in-command for the examination, watched her work with growing amazement and concern. Cadet Commander, your tactical approach is unconventional. Standard doctrine would call for defensive positioning until reinforcements arrive. Elena turned to look at him, and Thexroll felt his stone-like hide crawl with unease. Her eyes had become something dark and ancient, carrying depths that no academy cadet should possess. Commander, she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that made hardened veterans step back involuntarily. Standard doctrine assumes commanders who are willing to accept acceptable losses for political expedience. I am not that kind of commander. She returned to the tactical display, her hands moving across the control interfaces with surgical precision. The battle plan that emerged was unlike anything in Academy curriculum. Aggressive, unconventional, and carrying implications that made the examination supervisors exchange worried glances. Battle Group Alpha, maintain defensive positioning, but prepare for immediate redeployment. I'm sending you targeting data for precision strikes against enemy command vessels. Battle Group Beta, you will execute a flanking maneuver that officially doesn't exist in our tactical database. Commander Fex, roll S mandibles clicked in confusion. Cadet Commander, the maneuver you're describing isn't part of standard fleet operations. Where would you have learned such tactics? Elena's response came in a voice that seemed to echo from the spaces between stars. Some tactics are learned in classrooms. Others are written in the blood of dead families and burned into memory with the fires of murdered worlds. The battle began with Elena's forces moving in patterns that defied conventional military wisdom. Her defensive formations appeared vulnerable to enemy assault, but hidden within their positioning were trap mechanisms of devastating elegance. When enemy forces committed to their attacks, they found themselves caught in killing fields that eliminated entire squadrons with mathematical precision. But it was Elena's personal intervention that left the examination staff speechless. When the enemy commander attempted to use civilian evacuation ships as shields, Elena made a decision that violated every principle of acceptable military conduct. She ordered her flagship to engage enemy forces at point-blank range, putting her own vessel at extreme risk to protect civilian lives. All units, this is command. I'm taking the flagship into direct engagement with enemy capital ships. Maintain your assigned formations and prepare for dynamic tactical adjustment when the enemy command structure collapses. The examination supervisors found themselves frozen between professional duty and fascinated horror. Elena was demonstrating tactical brilliance that exceeded academy standards, but her methods belonged in classified operations that officially didn't exist. Her flagship, the Academy's prize training vessel, dove into the heart of the enemy formation like a predator among prey. Elena's navigation commands displayed knowledge of combat flying that belonged in Special Forces archives, not cadet training programs. She threaded her massive ship through enemy fire patterns with impossible precision, bringing her weapons to bear on targets that should have been beyond engagement range. Target enemy command vessel, forward batteries. Fire patterns Sierra 77, full spread. Commander Thek's role checked his tactical database frantically. Cadet Commander, fire pattern Sierra 77 doesn't exist in our standard protocols. Elena's laugh carried no humor, only the cold efficiency of someone who had learned warfare in the deepest darkness of space. It exists now, Commander. Some patterns are improvised when civilized warfare fails, and only survival matters. The enemy command vessel exploded in a flowering of light and debris, taking with it the coordinated threat to the civilian evacuation convoy. But Elena's assault had cost her flagship significant damage, and now she found herself surrounded by enemy forces that outnumbered her vessel 5-1. In the observation booth, Instructor Prime Veloth was reviewing tactical data that defied explanation. She's using combat techniques that are classified beyond our clearance level, he muttered, his compound eyes analyzing Elena's performance with growing amazement and alarm. Navigation patterns that suggest zero-gravity training in actual combat conditions. Weapon deployment strategies that belong in deep operations archives. Subinstructor Gliktar harmonizet nerfas Jonfusion. Sir, her psychological profile shows no indicators of advanced combat training. According to her records, she's never even been in space combat before joining the Academy. Velotha's mandibles clicked with sudden, terrible understanding. Unless her records are fabricated. Unless Elena Vasquez isn't who we think she is. On the flagship's bridge, Elena stood in the center of the command deck, her dark eyes reflecting the tactical displays with predatory intensity. Enemy ships converged on her position from all directions, but instead of fear or concern, her expression carried only cold calculation. All hands, prepare for close-quarters engagement. Battle Group Alpha, execute rescue operation on my signal. Battle Group Beta, begin flanking assault on enemy reserves. She moved to the weapons control station, her hands dancing across interfaces with expertise that belonged in special operations manuals. The flagship's defensive systems responded to her commands like extensions of her own body, creating interlocking fields of fire that turned approaching enemy vessels into expanding clouds of debris. But it was Elena's final gambit that left everyone speechless. As enemy forces closed to point-blank range, she implemented a tactical maneuver that existed only in the darkest corners of military theory. A controlled detonation of her own ship's power core, channeled through the main deflector array to create a directed energy pulse that eliminated entire enemy squadrons while leaving her own vessel intact. The technique was called a ghost strike, and it belonged to legends whispered in the deepest shadows of human space. Stories of refugee ships turning their dying breath into weapons of impossible destruction, taking entire enemy fleets with them into the dark. When the energy pulse faded and the tactical displays cleared, Elena's flagship stood alone in a graveyard of enemy vessels. The civilian evacuation convoy was safe, the strategic objectives achieved, and the Academy's most comprehensive tactical examination completed in record time with 0 acceptable losses. Elena stood in the center of the command deck, her breathing controlled but her eyes carrying depths that seemed to reflect entire galaxies of pain. Around her, the examination staff stared in stunned silence, uncertain whether they had witnessed brilliant tactical leadership or something far more dangerous. Commander Thek's role approached her carefully, his veteran instincts warning him that he was in the presence of something that belonged in classified files rather than Academy records. Cadet Commander, that was extraordinary, but I have to ask, who are you really? Elena looked at him with those dark, haunted eyes, and for a moment her carefully constructed mask slipped entirely. Thek's role glimpsed the truth that lay beneath 4 years of silence. A child raised in the spaces between stars, learning to fight with weapons made from desperation and hope, surviving in conditions that would break most minds. I'm someone who learned that sometimes civilization fails, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying echoes of burning ships and dying worlds. And when it does, someone has to be willing to become what others cannot, to do what others will not, to ensure that the innocent survive. She walked toward the exit, leaving behind a command crew that was no longer certain what they had witnessed. The examination was complete, the objectives achieved, but Elena Vasquez had revealed something that the Academy was unprepared to process. That evening, Elena sat alone in her dormitory pod for the last time, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Tomorrow would bring graduation, assignment to the Galactic Defense Fleet, and the end of 4 years spent hiding in plain sight. But Elena knew that her carefully constructed identity was finally cracking beyond repair. Her lips moved silently, forming words in that ancient, terrible language that existed only in humanity's darkest corners. Not a prayer this time, but an acknowledgement that some doors, once opened, revealed truths that could never be hidden again. Tomorrow, Elena Vasquez would graduate from the Academy with the highest honors in institutional history. But the galaxy was about to discover that they hadn't been training a cadet. They had been nurturing a ghost made flesh, a reminder of what humans became when civilization abandoned them to the darkness, and only survival remained. The final examination was over, but Elena's real test was just beginning. Graduation day arrived with the artificial dawn painting the Academy's ceremonial plaza in shades of gold and crimson. Elena stood with her graduating class, 237 cadets from across 17 species, each representing the pinnacle of their respective world's military potential. She should have felt pride, accomplishment, or at least relief that 4 years of careful deception had finally reached their conclusion. Instead, she felt the weight of inevitability settling over her like a shroud. The ceremony proceeded with military precision and pageantry befitting the galaxy's premier military institution. Dignitaries from across known space had gathered to witness the graduation of what many considered the most promising class in Academy history. Representatives from the Galactic Defense Command, planetary governments, and major military contractors filled the viewing stands, their various forms creating a tapestry of diplomatic importance. Elena's performance during the final examinations had shattered every Academy record. Her tactical scores exceeded theoretical maximums, her leadership evaluations bordered on the supernatural, and her strategic thinking had impressed veteran officers who had commanded real battles across multiple star systems. She stood at the top of her class, destined for assignment to the elite units that protected galactic civilization. But Instructor Prime Veloth knew the truth now. His investigation had finally penetrated the carefully constructed layers of Elena's false identity, revealing a history that explained everything and terrified him in equal measure. She was one of the ghost ship survivors, a child raised in the spaces between stars during humanity's darkest hour, trained by desperate parents and dying veterans to survive in conditions that civilized species couldn't imagine. The ghost ships had been humanity's last resort during the Void War, refugee vessels carrying survivors into deep space when their colonies faced extinction. Official records claimed they had all been destroyed or lost to the darkness between stars. But some had survived, drifting in the void for years, raising children who learned to fight with weapons made from salvaged ship components and hope forged from desperation. Elena Vasquez was living proof that not all the ghost ships had died in the dark. Cadets of the graduating class, announced Grand Admiral Morthek, the Cronin commander whose stone-like presence dominated the ceremonial podium. You represent the finest military minds in galactic civilization. Your training here will prepare you to defend peace, protect the innocent, and uphold the principles that unite our diverse species in common cause. Elena listened to the ceremonial words with growing irony. Peace, protection, principles, concepts that belonged to civilized worlds where people could afford moral luxury. She had learned different lessons in the spaces between stars, where survival required choices that would haunt civilized consciences. When her name was called for individual recognition, Elena stepped forward to receive the Academy's highest honor, the Galactic Star of Military Excellence, awarded to the cadet who demonstrated exceptional leadership and tactical brilliance. The medal felt heavy in her hands, its crystalline structure refracting light into rainbow patterns that seemed to mock the darkness in her soul. Cadet Elena Vasquez, Grand Admiral Morthek announced, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, graduates summa cum laude with the highest tactical scores in Academy history. She is assigned to Special Operations Command, effective immediately. Special Operations Command, the galaxy's elite military unit, responsible for operations that required capabilities beyond conventional forces. Elena felt a cold smile touch her lips. They thought they were rewarding her excellence. They had no idea they were placing a weapon in the hands of someone who understood exactly how to use it. The ceremony concluded with traditional military honors and the dispersal of new officers to their assigned units. Elena stood alone in the emptying plaza, her medal catching the artificial sunlight, her dark eyes reflecting thoughts that belonged in classified archives rather than graduation speeches. Cadet Vasquez. The voice belonged to Instructor Prime Veloth, who approached her with the careful steps of someone who knew he was addressing something dangerous. Congratulations on your extraordinary achievement. Elena turned to regard him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Thank you, Instructor Prime. The Academy has been educational. Veloth's mandibles clicked with nervous energy. I imagine it has, though I suspect your real education began long before you arrived here. For the first time in 4 years, Elena smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, cold, predatory, and carrying implications that made the veteran instructor's compound eyes narrow with concern. Some educations begin in classrooms, Elena said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that belonged in the deepest shadows of space. Others begin when civilization fails, and only survival remains. The Academy taught me theory. Life taught me application. Veloth felt a chill run through his carapace. The ghost ships, he said quietly. You're one of the survivors. Elena's smile widened slightly, becoming something that belonged in nightmares rather than graduation ceremonies. Officially, the ghost ships were destroyed or lost during the Void War. Officially, no children were raised in the spaces between stars, learning to fight with weapons made from desperation. Officially, Elena Vasquez is exactly who her records claim she is. But unofficially? Veloth asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to hear the answer. Elena's expression returned to its characteristic mask of polite neutrality, but her eyes remained dark pools that reflected depths no Academy cadet should possess. Unofficially, Instructor Prime, the galaxy is about to discover that humanity's greatest strength was never our wisdom or our technology. It was our unique ability to survive in places where civilization fails, and to emerge from that darkness carrying skills that others prefer to pretend don't exist. She saluted with mechanical precision and walked away, leaving Veloth standing alone in the plaza with the growing certainty that the Academy had just graduated something far more dangerous than a gifted officer. They had released a weapon into the galaxy, a reminder of what humans became when stripped of civilized constraints and forced to survive on their own terms. 3 months later, Lieutenant Elena Vasquez reported to Special Operations Command aboard the battleship Indomitable, flagship of the galaxy's elite military forces. Her reputation had preceded her, the Academy graduate who shattered every record, the tactical prodigy who demonstrated capabilities that exceeded theoretical limits. Her commanding officer, Colonel Marcus Steele, the same explosive specialist who had served under her command during Academy examinations, greeted her with a mixture of respect and wariness. Welcome to Special Operations Command, Lieutenant Vasquez. Or should I call you Ghost? Elena's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered behind her dark eyes. Lieutenant will suffice, Colonel. Ghost is a name for darker times. Colonel Steele studied her with the experienced gaze of someone who had served in the worst corners of galactic space. Something tells me darker times are exactly what we're preparing for. He was more correct than he realized. Intelligence reports were beginning to filter in from the galaxy's rim territories. Mysterious attacks on remote colonies, entire settlements vanishing without trace, and disturbing reports of enemy forces using tactics that defied conventional military understanding. The Galactic Defense Command was beginning to realize that they faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history. Elena reviewed the intelligence files with cold professional interest, her dark eyes analyzing tactical patterns that triggered memories she had spent years trying to suppress. The attack vectors, the surgical precision, the complete absence of survivors or witnesses. She had seen these patterns before during the darkest days of the Void War. "Colonel," she said quietly, her voice carrying undertones that made hardened Special Forces operatives look up from their briefings, "I believe I know what we're dealing with." Colonel Steele leaned forward, his expression serious. "Enlighten us, Lieutenant." Elena stood and moved to the tactical display, her movements carrying the fluid grace that had marked her academy performances. When she began analyzing the enemy attack patterns, her transformation was immediate and absolute. The careful mask of military professionalism disappeared, replaced by something dark and ancient that belonged in the deepest shadows of human space. "These aren't random raids or terrorist attacks," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made veteran officers straighten to attention. "This is systematic elimination of remote outposts to create isolation corridors. Someone is preparing invasion routes into core galactic territory." She manipulated the tactical display with expertise that exceeded her official training, highlighting patterns that revealed a strategic picture of terrifying scope. "The enemy is using void warfare tactics, operating from the spaces between stars, striking without warning, eliminating all witnesses to maintain tactical surprise." Colonel Steele felt his blood run cold. How could you possibly identify tactics that don't exist in our military databases? Elena turned to look at him, and everyone in the briefing room felt the temperature drop several degrees. Her eyes had become something dark and terrible, carrying depths that reflected years of survival in conditions that would break most minds. "Because I learned those tactics as a child, Colonel. When civilization abandoned us to the darkness between stars, we adapted. We survived, and we learned to fight with methods that civilized species prefer to pretend don't exist." The room fell silent as the truth finally emerged. Lieutenant Elena Vasquez, the Academy's most brilliant graduate, was something far more dangerous than a gifted officer. She was a ghost made flesh, a survivor of humanity's darkest hour, and perhaps the only person in the galaxy who understood how to fight an enemy that operated beyond the boundaries of civilized warfare. "The ghost ships," Colonel Steele whispered, his voice carrying the awe and terror of someone who had finally understood what they were dealing with. "You're one of the lost children." Elena nodded slowly, her expression carrying the weight of memories that belonged in classified archives. "The lost children grew up, Colonel, and now the galaxy is about to discover what we learned in the spaces between stars, that sometimes civilization needs monsters to fight monsters, and that humanity's greatest gift was never our wisdom or our technology." She returned to the tactical display, her hands moving across the interfaces with the expertise of someone who had learned warfare in the crucible of absolute desperation. "It was our ability to become whatever the darkness required us to be, and to emerge from that darkness carrying skills that others could never imagine." The briefing room remained silent as Elena began outlining a strategic response that belonged in the deepest shadows of military theory. Special Operations Command had just discovered that their newest officer wasn't just a brilliant tactician. She was a weapon forged in the fires of humanity's darkest hour, and perhaps the galaxy's only hope of surviving what was coming. Outside the battleship's viewports, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and something in the darkness between them whispered approval. The silent cadet had finally awakened, and Elena Vasquez, the ghost who had never spoken at the Academy until her battle name took over, was about to remind the galaxy why humans were feared throughout known space. Not for their civilization or their technology, but for their unique ability to become the monsters that other species needed them to be when the darkness came calling and only survival remained. The Academy had graduated a weapon. The galaxy was about to discover exactly what that weapon could do when finally unleashed.